This is the Fixer Punk Podcast, the podcast offering a non-toxic, gripe bomb-free form of punk that doesn't judge people for not taking help or advice from people that they don't feel like they can trust. I'm Grayson Peltier. Today's episode, I am actually going to be responding to a message that I got from a listener. This is the first time that I'm directly doing an episode based upon feedback. So please keep that coming. Please let me know what topics you want me to cover on future episodes. And you can reach out to me on any of the social media platforms. Both TikTok and Instagram are at FixerPunk. Twitter is at Grayson Nation, GreysonNation. Or you can call and I can play your voicemail on the show. We have a toll-free number that is 844-477-PUNK, 844-477-7865. Any questions, comments, personal dilemmas, things that you think need to be discussed in a more in-depth format, please let me know. And this listener, Cameron, I'm so glad that he reached out through our Instagram at FixerPunk. He was inquiring about the subject of homelessness, which we've covered on a few episodes before. It's not necessarily as in-depth, though, into this one particular facet of it that comes up a lot in political arguments and in arguments against a lot of the measures that are being put out there to help homeless people that do actually work. Which he asks in this question, he's wondering your opinion. He said, was wondering your opinion on another aspect of homelessness. When social workers and police poll the homeless people in my town, 60% of them say they don't want any assistance. But the amount of garbage, human waste, needles in downtown and residential areas keep increasing. How do we help those that haven't decided they need a solution? So, and that question was from Cameron at Cameron_PULS.PT on Instagram. Really good guy, actually in the fitness and physical therapy space. And we were chatting a bit ago, and he just decided to, after listening to some of the podcast episodes, send in this question, and I'm really glad he did. So let me address this first off, because first thing is that social workers and police are polled the homeless people 60%. I obviously, and I doubt he does too. I don't have the official data on this. But surveys can be very, very skewed by the sample of who you're surveying. I did an internship at an opinion research firm, and there were all these different techniques, and some of them are just kind of based on a guess more than anything to make sure that your sample is representative. But 60% of them say they don't want any assistance. And this does bring up a very, very serious issue, which is that a lot of homeless people are not going to take the assistance that is offered. But it is not because of the fact that they just don't want to take assistance, that they don't want help. I think that we have to differentiate that. It's because they don't trust the system, and also because the assistance offered often is really worse than being on the streets. You'll oftentimes hear, and I have seen a lot of comments from homeless people on the internet who have said that they have tried to seek assistance many, many times in the past and they failed to, or they have went and they've sought assistance. They've gone to a shelter, they've gone through all of the programs, and it's in fact better for them to remain on the street because the services and the shelters, especially the homeless shelters, I don't know what visual people have in their mind of like a homeless shelter, but oftentimes it is a terrible, terrible place in many parts of the country. I'm not sure what part of the country Cameron is in and what the services are like in his community. But oftentimes these shelters are run down. They're rampant with crime, with drugs, really mean staff that is like condescending to the residents. And sometimes it's also sort of futile because the next day you lose your space. So if you get in at a homeless shelter, from what I've heard, you actually lose your spot the next morning. You have to be out at like 6, 7 in the morning, and then you have to get back in line. And obviously that's not conducive to like doing anything in the day, because you're going to be sitting around there waiting just to be able to get a bed later on that night. And these places oftentimes don't treat the people very, very well. And that is probably why they don't want to go there. Another big reason is that people are not able to keep their stuff. They're not able to keep their belongings. A lot of people who become homeless are basically, they're taking their whole lives with them. Whatever life they had beforehand, they're taking all of those belongings, all of those things with them. And with the whole street cleanups and all of that, the stuff that they're cleaning up as quote unquote trash is oftentimes people's valuable belongings. And governments can't necessarily be trusted to return it. A lot of people experience issues getting their stuff returned by government agencies. And when you enter into a homeless shelter, a lot of times there are limitations on what you can bring in with you. So they're not going to want to do that. And they feel like they're safer on the street. A lot of times homeless people wind up developing communities in and of and within themselves. And for some reason, the resiliency of unhoused people actually frustrates certain legislators and people in the policy world. I actually mentioned on a prior episode the county in Montana that said that these were very well-resourced. These are very resourceful individuals that are being tricky or something like that. I forgot the exact wording they used in that letter. But they have actually figured a way to survive, and they've realized that not accepting the services in the long term is going to help them to survive better. They're realizing that if I can preserve like this space that I have, I can keep all my stuff on me, my important documents, my medications and all of that, and not be in a shelter that where there are possibly people in there that are going to be stealing from me, where it's possibly going to be a very dirty environment that's not well kept, and all just for me to be run out of there at 6 in the morning the next day and having to get back in line to get in there, that it's better for them and they can settle down into sleeping wherever they're sleeping with a bit more comfort and a bit more confidence than they could being shuffled around by the system. And then, of course, that's assuming they even get a shelter bed to begin with. What will oftentimes happen is that they'll keep getting promises, especially in relation to any sort of permanent housing. And this is the model that has been shown to work the best is housing first. So you're seeing very, very high success rates. You're seeing cities that are cutting their homeless rate by 50, 60%. You're seeing large percentages of cities that are doing housing first approaches that really succeed in this way. And oftentimes the people who bring up this thing of people who are not accepting services, oftentimes they're going to bring up mental health and addiction. They're going to say, okay, we can't just offer housing because they're addicted. They have mental issues. They have to go into mental health treatment first. They have to go through all this stuff first. They have to get themselves sober. They have to meet this, that, and the other requirement beforehand. And what has been shown to work, even in the most difficult populations, is to provide housing first, and people get burned by it. There, in an article I was reading, a city that actually tried to implement the housing first model, San Diego, they had a 10-year waiting list for housing, and they really didn't succeed that much with their model because they had these extremely long waiting lists. Their system was very disjointed. Their system was really not helping people in the way it should. It was sort of working randomly, not not in a systematic way like it was in Houston, which in Houston they really drastically reduced their homelessness rate because they reoriented their entire system toward making sure that people got housing first. Because oftentimes if you start generically asking homeless people to go into services, to go into shelters, and the offer isn't clear, just like in any other form of marketing, it's going to be, they're not necessarily going to want something if they've had a bad experience with it. And the thing about these quote unquote networked homeless communities, like some of these city lawmakers get upset at by trying to term them as basically very crafty, evil, conniving bums, is that word gets around. Just like if you or I was to go to a restaurant and we didn't like it, we would tell our friends, oh yeah, I went to that place. The food was terrible. And that gets around. And it's not pathological for us to avoid that restaurant because service is bad, food's bad, because my friend told me that. That's normal behavior. And same thing goes with certain service providers or agencies, and word gets around. Yeah, they're going to tell you you're going to get into permanent housing, but really all you're going to get is a shelter bed for a night. Or they're going to make you go in for this treatment program that is possibly not even going to really help you. You're going to get terrible mental health care, which that's the thing is that if you're going to go in with the whole mental health services angle, which it's important to offer good, high quality mental health services. But especially if you're forcing it or using it as a condition of housing, oftentimes these services are provided by underfunded, quote unquote, community mental health centers that really don't have the best reputation for offering good services, not necessarily because the people are not well intentioned. It's because they are severely under-resourced. So word gets around and people just stop falling for the false hope. They are not going to fall for it anymore because they see it as a trick. They see it as like a con artist. Like if you've heard the same sales pitch 100 times and you've responded to it and you know that what you're going to be given is some sort of scam, what would make you think that on time 101 that it is in fact legitimate? So pretty simply, it's because they've been sold a bill of goods. To answer the question is initially it's because the reason why they don't do it is because they've been sold a bill of goods before and they don't want to take it, and they've gotten into a point where they can at least keep themselves alive. You see like politicians chagrin at these tent cities and these communities, these encampments that need to be cleaned out. But it's because they have managed to create their own community and have managed to, in some cases, almost create a form of self-governance. Like there was a camp out in Columbus, Ohio with one of the street fight radio guys, Brett Payne. He was a big supporter of it, Camp Shameless. And the city basically went in and tore it down. But at least because of the attention given to it and the media attention and the lobbying from people like Brett, because Brett had Street Fight Radio, he was a popular radio personality who was coming and backing this community, which a lot of these homeless encampments don't have. They mostly have communities that are really, really upset at them. They managed to get better housing arrangements than the city of Columbus would normally offer to people who are unhoused. But these communities will organically spring up and self-organize. And then what happens is that the government basically comes in there with a physical bulldozer, or ideas that are tantamount to having a bulldozer come in to the security and the safety that the person has already established for themselves, even if it's suboptimal. Even if it's not good, even if you're still basically living outside, they have managed to find something that works. And then they come in and unceremoniously bulldoze through that or tell you to go in and do something. And an institution that is willing to go and wreck and destroy what you believe to be your security and your community and the people that have managed to actually help you and actually help keep you alive when everybody else failed you, including the political leaders, including the people who are employing these people, and especially when it comes to law enforcement, of course you're going to say no to them. Of course you're going to say no to those people because you can't trust them. And this behavior is actually kind of considered normal in some ways in other places. Like, I used to be on the conservative side in politics, and people always say there's nothing worse than than somebody from the government saying that they're here to help. And especially, like, if this surveying, like this 60% number, if some of those survey results were collected by law enforcement officers, there's definitely going to be a resistance to engaging in any way, shape, or form with police. In fact, you oftentimes get told by civil rights people and attorneys, just don't talk to the police. So somebody simply refusing to talk probably in that survey would get coded as being a response of declining services. But then how do we actually solve this? Going back to the question of how do we deal with the people who don't want services? So first things first is actually offer housing first. And don't tell me that offering housing first, and when I'm talking about housing first refers to offering permanent supportive housing. That's not a shelter. That's not just a random bed in a warehouse somewhere. It's not even necessarily like a hotel room. It's actually having permanent supportive housing and having that be set up. Actually start to offer housing first and do it without conditions. So you get housed and it's without any conditions. It's not like you are only allowed to get housed if you go to this job training program, you get off of all of your drugs immediately, which that could be dangerous. There are some drugs that have withdrawal symptoms that can really, really hurt people if you stop them right away. Or you have to go to this specific mental health group. You have to go to this support group, or you have to start this specific, and oftentimes it's this specific treatment. It's not even mental health treatment generally. And it's not customized. Oftentimes there's just this blanket assumption that they all have schizophrenia, so I'll give them all long-acting depot antipsychotics, which is that's not appropriate clinical practice without actually getting a proper diagnosis. But you get them into housing first. And once they see that, they start to trust it. Once they actually see that I'm being put in a good place, then they actually start to trust you. And they have to, and once that starts to happen, if they see in their community that this isn't some effort of a police officer that's trying to get them taken to jail, they see that their friends and the community that they built up, that they are happily accepting this, that one person will do it. There's always going to be the Mikey in the group who's going to try something new. And once they see that, once they see, oh yeah, they're actually helping them, they're actually doing something good for them. Back when the pandemic hit, there was a program called Project Room Key where they were giving homeless people hotel rooms. And they knew they were going to an actual like hotel that had been converted for this purpose. There are major problems with the administration of this program, but there were people clamoring for those hotel rooms because they knew it wasn't going to be like one of the really crappy shelters that they were in before. So actually making the services good is really the first step. And then it has to be a matter of actually really being part of the community itself. You have to take an effort to rebuild trust. And the people who go in there, again, just like when you think about like marketing of a product, you want to see sometimes testimonials, or you want to see somebody, if you're buying a product and then you hear, oh yeah, somebody else is using it, or the person who's selling it even has used the product. Or that person is like me in some way or another. You trust it more. So you want to have people who are peers, who are peer support workers, not necessarily somebody who is a clinical social worker, somebody with an academic background, somebody with a law enforcement background, somebody with a medical background, although those people are all very important. But just like I think I've mentioned in a few of my articles or in a prior episode, there are experts in the community and in the native knowledge and behavioral patterns of the community. And those experts are the people with the lived experience within that community. That native knowledge to the community is important because you want to know what they're thinking. Because right now, just taking the stat of 60%. We know that they're saying no, but if I was a marketer trying to sell a product, I would be trying to figure out, why are they saying no? Why don't they want to buy this? So you have to, and I would ask a bunch of people. I'd put a bunch of people in a room, have a focus group. Heck, I'd hire people in that target demographic to work in my office. And I've been in marketing departments. A lot of my communications consulting work has been in the political and nonprofit space, but it's also been in the commercial and corporate business space, selling products and services as well. And that's how it's done. So you want to have peer support workers with that lived experience. And you also want to embrace their autonomy. You want to embrace the fact that these people have actually, the fact that they've survived, and maybe if they've created these communities, these quote-unquote encampments, you want to embrace and realize that that means that there is hope and there's potential in them, and they don't necessarily need to be hyper or overly micromanaged. Yes, we want to control in an appropriate way so that there isn't excessive drug use or crime, especially in shared congregate facilities. Those types of safety things, that's a key aspect of the experience. And maybe you have different locations where it's more open to people who are tapering off of drugs, or who still are using it in a harm reduced way, versus those who aren't, versus say families with children and women that are single and that are scared about things like sexual assault. But you want to embrace their level of community and personal autonomy. You don't want to go in there and basically wind up micromanaging the other person's life. And once they see that, and they see that, because I've seen, like, there are certain, like, homeless programs even in my area, and they have crazy long lists of requirements. Like, they put you on, like, no contact for a month. Like, you can't even get on a phone call with somebody from the outside world when you go into some of these programs, the longer term programs. And sound that to you or I, would you or I accept treatment on that grounds? If you were seeking psychiatric treatment or medical hospitalization, would you seek out the facility where your family can't visit you? So in a way, it's about treating others the way you would want to be treated on a very, very simple level. But then you go from there, and sometimes that process to build trust takes a long time. But we know statistically that providing the housing first, and not gatekeeping it with all these other requirements, and letting people have a place to live right away as soon as possible. Not only is there the rapid resheltering that prevents this stuff from getting out of hand, because once you get homeless for a long, long, long time, your mind's going to get jaded. You're going to have all these traumatic experiences. You're going to have these bad experiences, encounters with the system, and wanting to push away the system. But even in the most severe, hardest to treat cases of homelessness, the success rate of a housing first approach, where you're just like, no, you're not required to go to all of these drug treatment, addiction treatment, job programs. You're not required to, but we're going to offer them. That's again with the housing first. It's not housing first. It's not just housing only. It's housing first, but you get all these supportive services. You get the addiction treatment, the mental health treatment, the job training, the clothing supports, the living skills, all of that stuff. You get it, but it's your choice. Once you're housed, you get to have that full menu of options to you. And we know that this approach, which was actually developed by a psychologist in New York for people with mental health issues, we know that even in the hardest to treat homeless populations, there was a study from UC San Francisco that showed that 86% of people who received, as they call it, the treatment, which is the housing first package of giving them the housing first and then offering them the supportive services once they're in housing, but making sure first and foremost, first priority is making sure they're housed. When they did that, 86% of those who received that remained housed for the vast majority of the follow-up period, which was an average of about 3 years. So 86%, by just making not even some of the softer changes that I explained here, which is the more caring, compassionate approach and like listening to people and those things, which definitely do make a difference, just by switching over to housing first, and the permanent supportive housing, making that readily available, that one change resulted in 86% of people staying housed for 3 years. So it's not even just them accepting it and going into it. They're staying in these programs. And you're seeing that the cities that adopt this approach are seeing their homelessness being cut by half. You'll see people who even, it's been projected in some cases, even the most successful cases, it's like 80-90%. But of course, that still leaves a small percentage of people that are going to remain homeless. And some of that is going to be transitory. Some of that is going to be people who are going to be on the streets for a certain period of time, and they're going to be able to help themselves in a way, or avail themselves of resources, or family brings them in, something like that. And it may become more transitory because over time, and that's the thing is that, again, over time, if you build it, they will come. I really do believe that when it comes to permanent supportive housing. Word will get out that this is good, that the help is actually helping. But there are going to be some people that will resist. And I actually saw a good example from a program locally in my area that sent out in one of their letters that they send out soliciting for donations. They said that their approach is very, very flexible, and they showed a case study of how it worked. They actually met somebody who was living on the streets since the year 1974, which I can't believe. I can't believe somebody could survive that long, but apparently it does happen. Since 1974 in the same town in my area. And it says here, our team had made many attempts over the years to bring him into one of our shelter programs, and time again, we were unsuccessful. But that didn't stop us. We know that there can be barriers to accepting help from an individual with a long history of homelessness. In this case, Archie was extremely anxious and uncomfortable with a group shelter setting. He didn't trust service providers, and he felt that there was nowhere to go. And then it says here that he is 77 years old. And what they said here is that in order to meet the needs of the most vulnerable seniors who are hesitant about shelter, our team created our Safe Spaces program. They reserved 3 rooms in their shelter that could give those clients time and private space to build trust with our staff. So you'll have cases like this, but this is obviously a success story because they made that one shift to the service from being a group shared shelter for people that are resisting help, that have been homeless for many years, for people who are elderly, that they offer some spaces that are private rooms, and they take a more gentle approach to it, and they remove that barrier. So you could wind up taking from that small percentage of people who would not accept the initial offer by saying, we'll keep working with you. And this group kept persisting, this one shelter in my area. So since I read from their copy, I'll give you the name, Friendship Shelter out of Laguna Beach, California. Because they build that relationship over time, and they see how sincere these people are, and that they're offering them something that they feel comfortable with. A format, maybe they're not comfortable with going into a shelter. Maybe they're not comfortable with that, but with this option where they have private rooms available for certain people, that might be the game changer. That might be what does it. So it is going to be a matter of persistence and a matter of offering the help they need. And it does work. It does happen. This is a good case study of a program that really knows how to do that personal touch well and serve the needs of each individual and seeing each individual as their own person instead of just using a very, very factory assembly line type model. The type of shelter where you just see like rows and rows of cots, and you have basically cops that are like, get off the sidewalk or else we're going to take you to jail. And if you go to the shelter, then that's your way of us not taking you to jail. That hard-nosed approach that some very conservative homelessness quote unquote gurus were using, that wouldn't be able to accomplish the result that I explained there from that letter. Because it's these big warehouse shelters where it's just like cots all over the place, all out in the open. You need a variety of options to suit individual needs, and you need the compassion to work with the person to know that they actually do have a voice in this and that they do have agency. And once you do that, then you start to see the situation improve. And in some ways, what you also have to do is you have to kind of realize that maybe there are some people who are going to remain this way. Maybe there are some people who will remain that way. Obviously, if they're doing stuff that's dangerous or that can harm other people, then that needs to be addressed. There needs to be accountability in a restorative manner. But that problem will start to go away with time if we stop creating more people who are in situations where they will become unhoused. That's, of course, the goal of rapid rehousing, but it also has to be cause for thinking about all of the systems that cause people to be dropped into this life. That's stuff from evictions, from high rents, landlords that are conniving and trying to find ways to get tenants out of the property to do renovations to sell it, and instituting better regulations, all the way to living wages that pay the rent. Because over time, and that's the thing, is we're talking about one point in time. In the future, things can change, things can get better, and these populations will decrease as we start to get people housed and keep people housed. I think that is where the big hope in this lies, along with implementing strategies that make it more of a friendly process, something that you would that if you were homeless, if you were in that situation, that you feel like you could trust. And oftentimes, the people who are the most strong-willed, the most able to live and survive unhoused, are oftentimes the people who can have some of the best success stories. People who don't necessarily want to take the help because they feel like they will be ceding their agency and they feel like they can work it out on their own. Those are sometimes the people who are going to improve the best if given the right kind of support that gives them autonomy. I like to say that today's nuisance could be tomorrow's champion. And I definitely believe that. And if we start to see people as people with potential and with lives rather than just a problem to be taken care of, shifting the attitude makes a big difference. And one little note about that question. He notes in here, in his question, Cameron notes, garbage, human waste, and needles in downtown. So that's also sort of a separate issue from homelessness. Obviously, those things are sanitation issues. Those are public health problems. They're serious. So one of the things that can be done, and one of the things that can build trust on a very practical level, is if you start offering sanitation services to homeless communities. Instead of trying to stop people from feeding people, put in restrooms, put in porta potties, put in stuff, and make sure that they're well cleaned and maintained, and that you're actually showing that you care, that your community gives a damn. And once that is done, then they might start to trust, and they're seeing, oh yes, this is these people from this agency, from this NGO, from this church or whatever organization is helping out. These people actually do care, and they do want to help me. They don't just want to push me out of here, threaten me, and make me feel like crap and force me into something where I'm not going to be treated well. And it helps deal with that immediate problem. You give those sanitation, those restrooms, you get that in there. And then, of course, the needles specifically, obviously that indicates some sort of drug use, and we want to definitely talk about harm reduction with drugs. And one of the barriers is the requirement that you go into substance use treatment, or that you immediately abstain from drugs, that you immediately get off of your drugs, or even just the requirement that you quit if you go into any of these programs or facilities. And there should definitely be the opportunity to go to substance use treatment if that's what's desired. But we also need to take into account a harm reduction approach. You can get those needles off the street by having safe needle disposal. You can set up, if the legal system permits it, if we can get the legislative action around it, you can set up safe injection sites where it's medically supervised. You can do programs where you can get people into addiction treatment. And this is how many other countries, including in Europe and in other places in the world, they will have a place where you can inject heroin, you can inject these hard drugs that you'd think unimaginable, but it's in a medical setting with medical technicians and addiction doctors available to help and make sure you don't overdose, and to make sure it's done in a clean, safe, and sanitary way. There are harm reduction centers. I think in New York City I saw a really nice one where it was almost like a day center for homeless people, and they provided the harm reduction services of being able to use clean needles and dispose of those needles safely. And that center had a bunch of resources for shelter programs, for addiction treatment programs, for rehab centers where you can go and live while you're getting sober. And that model works. So you can resolve those acute failures while you're moving people through the funnel toward accepting the offer of full-on services. And of course, what speeds it up is offering true housing without conditions. And we know that statistically, but you can move them. As you move them through that, you build trust, you can already start to alleviate these acute problems without having to immediately fully solve the unhoused problem and force everybody out of there. You can't just you're not going to be able to snap a finger and get everybody out of your city who's unhoused. But as time progresses, you can do that while alleviating the most serious health and safety concerns. And of course, there are still going to be people who misbehave, housed or unhoused. People misbehave in society, and that's a very complicated discussion. I tend to be a big advocate of restorative justice and helping people to get what they need in their life, and then helping them to have accountability for the consequences of their actions in a non-punitive way. But that's far beyond the scope of this episode, and this episode's actually gone longer than I would have expected it. But I think it's a very important topic to explain so that we know that there are answers to these problems. The answer isn't just to kick everybody to the curb, to throw them into a building, warehouse them. It isn't to wield the criminal justice system heavily, because we know that criminal records actually make people homeless. We know that people who get out of jail are often unhoused because of background check requirements for housing, but also for employment. So we have to be mindful of those things as well as we do this, because we want to set them up for long-term success, and we don't want this to happen to anybody again. And I believe that as we start to solve the problem, it will create one success, creates two successes, creates three successes. It all happens in sequence as we start doing the right thing and actually doing something that would make the person happy to want to enter into a new life. and making the services available so that their minds can be cleared up. So mentally they can see that vision, they can see that future, and making those services, again, accessible, available, but eliminating that first major stressor of them being unhoused, and providing the services in an appropriate and compassionate way, rather than with a punitive or judgmental attitude. All right, so I'm glad that you listened to all of that. I really appreciate the fact that you have taken the time to spend with me today and learn about this issue. Please come back for future episodes. Please follow the social media. Send in any questions, any comments, concerns, any of that. You can call them in, 844-477-PUNK, 844-477-7865. Email Grayson, Greyson, at offspeedsolutions.com. You can also go to the social media, just like Cameron did, at FixerPunk, on Instagram and TikTok, or on Twitter at Grayson Nation, Greyson, Nation. If you are in any of these spaces advocating for homeless people or advocating for any cause, if you're part of an organization and you need some support in terms of thinking of strategies, ways to communicate ideas, ways to help the public realize what can be done and what the future can look like, and build support around your cause, build support around your organization, that is what I do. Offspeedsolutions.com is the website. Also offering communication support for purpose-driven businesses that need help getting their messages out to the public as well. Again, I'm so glad that you took the time to listen to this episode today. And thank you so much, and I'll see you again very soon.